Are you about to install Ubuntu's next kernel on an AMD ROCm system? And are you wondering whether Linux 7.2 is ready for your daily driver? You are in the right place. By the end of this video, you will know which update needs extra care, what the newest kernel candidate is actually for, and how GNOME may make experimental features safer to test. The most practical story this week comes from Ubuntu's kernel team. Its forthcoming 7.0.0 28.28 kernel has a confirmed AMDGPU regression in compute-heavy ROCm workloads. For people using tools such as Comfy UI or Stable Diffusion XL, reports show slowdowns as high as 42 times. That is not a cosmetic benchmark dip. It can turn a quick repeatable task into a workflow you stop using. The difficult part is that Ubuntu is still shipping that kernel. On the surface, releasing a known regression sounds like an avoidable mistake, but this update also carries critical security fixes. That leaves a real operational trade-off, performance for a narrow but important group versus patches that cannot simply wait. Keep that tension in mind, because the official mitigation is more measured than a blanket never update. The scope matters. Ubuntu points to AMDGPU systems doing ROCm compute, particularly Ubuntu 26.04, and uses migrating to the 7.0 hardware enablement stack on Ubuntu 24.04. If your machine mainly browses, plays games, or handles office work, this report does not prove your desktop will become 42 times slower. The issue is workload specific, but it is very real inside that workload. The upstream repair already exists in Linux 7.0.13, but it missed Ubuntu's 7.0.0 28.28 release timing. Ubuntu's advice is direct. If you depend on AMD ROCm compute, remain on your current kernel until the follow-up update carries the fix. Read the advisory and your distribution's update notes before changing a production system. Do not discover this one halfway through an overnight render. Upstream development is moving in parallel. Linus Torvalds released Linux 7.2 release candidate 4 on July 19th. This is the fourth release candidate, not a stable kernel you should rush onto a production machine. The main story is sustained maintenance, a broad set of fixes, tests, and driver work, at the pace Torvalds described as the new normal. Torvalds said the candidate is not small, although nothing in the statistics looked especially unusual. Some larger-looking AMDGPU changes are mostly code movement and added comments, not a dramatic feature drop. He also noted that AI and LLM-assisted analysis continues to uncover fixes. The useful takeaway is simple. Active testing finds problems before a stable release gets to everyone. That brings us to a problem Linux users know well. New features are exciting, but experimental packages can replace stable components on the machine you need every day. Traditional testing can mean unofficial repositories, manual cleanup, and a chance that a weekend experiment becomes a recovery job. GNOME's proposed answer is interesting because it tries to change that risk model instead of asking testers to accept it. The project is tentatively called Test Center, and it is still a prototype, not an app you can install today. The Modal Collective's proposal would let developers share experimental app builds through a link. It would visibly mark them as experimental across the system and set them to expire after a chosen test period. That matters because good testing needs more participants than just developers. The more ambitious part concerns system features. The proposal is to generate a system extension image or sizext for each merge request. The experiment applies as a non-destructive overlay on top of the existing system. Remove it and you return to the original state. If this lands as intended, broader pre-release testing could become safer and much less intimidating for normal Linux users. This is bigger than one desktop project. Flatpak made application delivery more manageable for many users. Image-based systems and extension images could eventually make system-level experimentation more manageable too. There is still implementation work ahead, but the objective is practical. Get better feedback without asking people to gamble with their daily driver. That is a healthy direction for open source testing. From a prototype to a release you can use. System 76 has published COSMIC Epoch 1.3 for POP OS 24.04. The visual headline is an optional frosted glass appearance in COSMIC settings. It looks good, but the release is more than translucency. It also includes translation work, display fixes, input improvements, and GPU monitoring changes across the Rust-based desktop. The release notes include fixes for multi-GPU texture corruption, an external monitor problem that could leave a laptop display at its vendor logo, and fractional mouse wheel scrolling in the terminal. It also improves GPU information in the monitor. Developers need newer libcosmic versions to use the frosted glass effect in their apps and applets. This is a refinement release, which is exactly how a young desktop becomes dependable. KDE has a different kind of desktop news in progress. Plasma 6.8 is gaining a way to assign processes to specific CPUs or CPU CPU groups directly from System Monitor. CPU-affinity is not new to Linux, but it has often meant a terminal command or a specialist utility. Bringing it into a familiar desktop interface could make a useful performance control more discoverable for power users. Kotlin is also gaining server-side drop shadows for Windows that do not draw their own, including automatic treatment for certain X11 Windows. That sounds small, but desktop polish is built from small details. In the current Plasma 6.7 line, the team is also fixing a reasonably common Discover crash during update installation. KDE's focus is split between making the next release more capable and today's release less frustrating. One short operator note: Januscape CVE 2026-53359 is a reported use after free in KVM x86 shadow paging. The relevant threat model is an x86 KVM host that accepts untrusted guests and exposes nested virtualization, not an ordinary desktop. If you run that kind of multi-tenant environment, check your vendor advisory and confirm that the host kernel includes the fix. Keep the response focused on normal patching and change control. Put these stories together and the week has a consistent theme. Linux is moving quickly, but the valuable question is not only what is newest, it is what is mature enough for your workflow and what needs a safer testing path. Ubuntu's AMDGPU warning is a reminder to respect workload-specific regressions. Linux 7.2 Release Candidate 4 is a reminder that release candidates exist to be tested. GNOME's proposal is a reminder that testing itself can improve. For an immediate action plan, start with the workload you actually run. If that includes ROCm compute, check the Ubuntu advisory before taking the next kernel update. If you are testing Linux 7.2 release candidates, do it on a machine or volume where rollback is routine. And if you are evaluating desktop changes, distinguish a released COSMIC build from KDE work that is still headed toward a future version. There is also a useful maintenance lesson here. The best update policy is not always install everything immediately, and it is not freeze everything forever. It is knowing which changes affect your hardware, keeping a known good boot option, and reading the small print when an advisory names a particular stack. That approach is less exciting than a one-line rule, but it is how you avoid turning an ordinary update night into recovery time. For desktop enthusiasts, the distinction matters just as much. COSMIC Epoch 1.3 is a real refinement release with fixes you can evaluate today on its supported platform. KDE's CPU-affinity work is promising, but it is development work rather than a reason to assume the feature is already in your stable install. And GNOME Test Center is a design proposal, not a product announcement. Keeping those labels straight makes Linux news more useful. That is the standard I would apply to every weekly roundup. Ask whether a report is stable, whether it affects your workflow, and whether the recommended response is testing, waiting, or patching. In this week's set, the answer changes from story to story. That is not uncertainty for its own sake. It is the practical discipline that lets you benefit from a fast-moving Linux ecosystem without treating every headline as an emergency. If this roundup helped you decide what deserves your attention, leave a like, subscribe to Ton Does Linux, sign up for the newsletter at tondaslinux.com/subscribe, and share this video with the Linux user who is about to test an update on their daily driver.